There's this quiet hum that fills my small house now. A hum of peace, you know? It's not the absence of sound, but the absence of noise, the frantic, soul-crushing kind that used to live inside my head. It's the sound of Buster, my dog, snoring softly at the foot of my bed, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against wood in my garage on a Saturday, the low thrum of jazz. For the first time in what feels like forever, I'm truly at peace. And that, right there, is the consequence of a battle I never thought I'd have to fight. A battle for my own life, against the people who were supposed to love me most. It all started 18 months after my divorce. That's when my ex-wife, Chloe, showed up on my doorstep, with a child who wasn't mine, and my own parents acting like they were delivering a peace offering instead of an emotional bomb. The whole thing was engineered, an intervention, a forced reunion. And when I finally said no, they tried to burn my world down around me. I work at a museum in Springfield, Illinois, restoring pottery that's been shattered for centuries. I piece together fragments that archaeologists dig up from ancient sites. And that work, it teaches you patience. It teaches you that some things can be saved, some things can be put back together, even if the cracks always show. But it also teaches you that some things are too damaged to save. That the structural integrity is just gone, and holding it together is just pretending. You learn to recognize the difference before you waste years trying to glue together something that will never hold. My marriage to Chloe taught me the same lesson, just the hard way. She cheated on me with a guy named Liam, who worked at the physical therapy clinic where she was a receptionist. When she left, she didn't apologize or beg or show any remorse. She just said she needed to explore her feelings and I should respect that. Then she packed her stuff into Liam's truck one Wednesday afternoon while I stood in my driveway watching. My parents were there that day. They watched her load boxes into another man's vehicle, and instead of supporting me, they told me I should fight for her. My mom said, marriage is complicated. My dad said I should think about what drove her to that point. And when I pointed out she was literally leaving me for someone else, they looked at me like I was being dramatic. They stayed in touch with Chloe after the divorce, of course. My mom would mention her casually at family dinners, like nothing had happened, like Chloe hadn't walked out on 7 years of marriage without looking back. The settlement gave her half our savings. She left me Buster because Liam was allergic. Then, 6 months later, she dumped Buster at a shelter because apparently Liam changed his mind and wanted to try allergy medication instead. I found out from a mutual friend. I went and got Buster back, and now he sleeps at the foot of my bed in the small house I bought after the divorce. It's a 1950s place with hardwood floors that creak in all the right places. I refinish furniture in my garage on weekends. I listen to jazz while I sand down old chairs. And for the first time in years, I had actual peace. Not the kind you fake at family gatherings or convince yourself exists because admitting otherwise feels too heavy, but real peace, where you wake up on a Saturday morning without dread sitting in your chest like a stone. Last week, I was in my garage sanding an old wooden stool I'd picked up at an estate sale. The jazz was playing low. Buster was asleep in the corner. I heard a car door slam outside. I wasn't expecting anyone. I don't get visitors. I like it that way. I turned off the sander and walked to the front window. And that's when I saw Chloe standing on my porch, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Behind them, pulling into my driveway, was my parents' car. My mom got out holding a casserole dish like she was arriving at a potluck. My dad got out and adjusted his jacket like he was about to give a speech. And I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Chloe looked thinner, exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. The little girl, Maya, was clinging to her leg, looking around like she didn't understand where she was or why she was there. I opened the door before they could knock. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and waited. My mom smiled that controlling smile she does and held up the casserole. "Sweetheart, just hear her out," she said. And Chloe finally looked up at me. Liam had left. She'd made mistakes. She was behind on rent. She'd lost her job. And Maya needed stability. We were good once. I was a good man. She didn't have anywhere else to go. My dad stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder. "You're a reasonable person, Ethan. You're a good man," he said, and my mom nodded enthusiastically. "You have a house. You're doing well. You could help." The little girl was staring at me with these big brown eyes, and I realized she had no idea what was happening. She was just being dragged into the wreckage of adult decisions she didn't make. Here's what hit me in that moment: they didn't come because Chloe wanted forgiveness. They came because they needed a solution. Chloe's life had fallen apart, and instead of helping her themselves, instead of letting her face the consequences of leaving her marriage for another man, they decided to make it my problem. They decided that because I have a house and a stable job, and because I didn't burn my life down chasing feelings, I should absorb the fallout of her choices. My mom wasn't holding a casserole, she was holding a bribe. My dad wasn't offering support. He was handing me a script he expected me to follow. Chloe wasn't asking for help. She was asking me to be the backup plan I never agreed to be. I looked at all three of them standing on my porch. I looked at that little girl who deserved so much better than this. And I said one word: no. My mom's face went blank. My dad started to say something. Chloe's mouth opened like she was going to argue. And I stepped back and closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to the garage. I turned the jazz back on and I picked up the sander. Behind me, I could hear them talking. I could hear my mom's voice getting louder. I could hear Chloe crying. I could hear my dad knocking harder, but I didn't move. They stood out there for maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer. And then I heard the car doors slam and the engine start and the sound of them driving away. I sat down on my workbench. I looked at Buster, who had woken up and was staring at me like he was waiting for an explanation. And I realized my hands had stopped shaking. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. This was me finally recognizing that some people will watch you break and then hand you the pieces like it's your responsibility to fix them. I walked inside, opened my laptop, and created a new document titled Actions. Change locks, install security cameras, block all phone numbers, email lawyer, update emergency contacts, revise will. I sat there looking at that list, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Like I was making decisions based on what I needed instead of what other people expected from me. My mom called that night at 9:30. I was already in bed reading. Buster was curled up next to me, and I watched her name light up my phone 3 times before it went to voicemail. She called again at 10 o'clock. Then my dad called at 10:15, and I listened to the notifications pile up like snow in a storm. The next morning, I had 6 voicemails and 14 text messages. My mom's messages, all the same disappointed tones, saying we needed to talk like adults, saying I was being unreasonable and cruel. My dad's voicemails were shorter, just him saying my name and asking me to call back. But there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard before, something sharp and angry underneath the surface. I screenshotted every message. I saved every voicemail. And I put them all in a folder on my laptop labeled documentation. Then I blocked both their numbers. I blocked Chloe's number. And I went to work like it was just another day. By Thursday, the calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. My Aunt Carol left a message saying I was being cruel, that a little girl needed help, and I was turning my back on family. A number with a different area code called, and a woman I didn't know said she was a friend of Chloe's, and I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning a child. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept screenshotting, kept saving, kept documenting every single attempt at contact. At work, my boss, David, pulled me aside during lunch and asked if everything was okay at home. He said I seemed distracted. I told him everything was fine. Told him I was just dealing with some family boundary issues and that it was handled. He nodded and didn't push. David's good like that. He doesn't pry. Friday morning at 6:35, I was making coffee in my kitchen when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my parents' car. I watched my dad get out and walk up to my porch with this determined stride. Watched him try the door handle like he genuinely thought it might be unlocked. My mom got out and stood behind him, holding her phone like she was about to call me. And I just stood there, drinking my coffee, watching them through the window. My dad knocked loud, the kind of knock that says, "Open this door right now." And I didn't move. He knocked again, called my name with that edge in his voice, even sharper now. My mom walked up and pressed her face against the window, trying to see inside. And I stayed perfectly still in the kitchen where they couldn't see me. They stood there for 15 minutes, trying different approaches, calling, knocking, checking the side gate. And then they finally gave up and left. I waited until their car disappeared down the street. Then I called a locksmith and scheduled him for that afternoon. I ordered security cameras online, the kind with cloud storage and motion alerts that would record everything. And I paid extra for next-day delivery. Monday morning, I had a meeting scheduled with Attorney Roberts at 9 o'clock, the same guy who handled my divorce. He's the kind of person who doesn't smile much but gets things done efficiently and thoroughly. I brought my laptop. I showed him the documentation folder with everything organized by date and type. And he actually whistled when he saw how meticulously I'd kept records. "You don't mess around," he said. And I told him I'd learned from the divorce to document everything, to never assume people will be reasonable or honest. He went through the voicemails, the text messages, the screenshots from unknown numbers, and he leaned back in his chair with this look of professional satisfaction. "This is textbook harassment. We can absolutely work with this." I paid him an $800 retainer and left his office feeling like I'd just put on armor. Like I finally had someone in my corner who understood what I was dealing with. The security cameras arrived Tuesday, and I installed them myself that evening. Small units mounted under the eaves that weren't obvious unless you were specifically looking for them. Wednesday afternoon, they caught my parents coming back. I was at the hardware store buying sandpaper when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and watched in real time as they walked up to my porch, knocked, waited, looked around, confused about why I wasn't answering, then finally left. They had no idea they were being recorded, and I saved every second of that footage to my laptop, added it to the documentation folder with a timestamp and notes about the date. Thursday morning, I got a call from David at work. He sounded uncomfortable and apologetic. "Chloe came to the lobby asking for you," he said, and I could hear the unspoken question in his voice. The "what's going on here" that he was too polite to ask directly. I told him if she came back to call the police. I told him I had a lawyer involved and this was officially a harassment situation. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Understood." And that was it. No judgment, no questions. I called Susan in HR after lunch, explained the situation without going into unnecessary details, and she added Chloe to a restricted visitors list. She said if Chloe showed up again, security would escort her out immediately. She said, "This kind of thing happens more than people think," and I felt grateful she didn't make me explain the whole messy history. Friday, I found a card wedged in my front door. My security footage showed my mom's car pulling up at 7 o'clock that morning, showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, then tucking something into the doorframe before driving away quickly. I didn't open it. I didn't even touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off the door and drove it straight to Attorney Roberts' office. He opened it wearing latex gloves, like he was handling evidence in a criminal case. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mom talking about legacy and forgiveness and how Grandpa Arthur would be ashamed of the man I'd become. "This is manipulative as hell," Attorney Roberts said, shaking his head. "None of this is about his health or family values. It's all about getting you to respond, getting you to break." He added it to our file and told me we were building something solid, something that would hold up in court if we needed it to. The following Tuesday afternoon, I was leaving the museum when I saw a woman standing by my car in the parking lot. She was older, maybe mid-50s, and she smiled this warm, friendly smile when she saw me approaching. She introduced herself as Linda, Chloe's mom, and said she wanted to talk parent to parent about what was best for everyone. "I'm not a parent," I said clearly. And I unlocked my car and got in without looking at her. She leaned down toward my window and started saying something about understanding and compassion and how we all make mistakes. And I started the engine and looked directly at her. "Don't contact me again," I said. Then I drove away and called Attorney Roberts from the car. He said we were building a strong case for restraining orders if we needed to escalate. He said every incident like this just strengthened our position. That night, my friend Brooke texted me. She's Chloe's cousin, but we stayed friendly after the divorce because she's always been straightforward and honest with me. "They're planning an intervention. They're going to try to ambush you somewhere. Just warning you," she wrote. I thanked her, told her I appreciated the heads up. And I realized something sitting there, reading her message in my quiet house with Buster sleeping on the couch. They weren't done. They were just getting started. And they genuinely believed if they just pushed hard enough, I would eventually break and give them what they wanted. The intervention was supposed to happen that Saturday at my parents' house. Brooke gave me the details Friday night. They'd invited extended family and told everyone I was going through something serious and needed support. They'd even arranged for Chloe and Maya to be there, probably assuming someone in the family would convince me to show up if they all ganged up together. I didn't go. I stayed home, spent the morning refinishing the stool in my garage. And around noon, Brooke sent me updates from inside the house. "Everyone's here. They're waiting. Your mom keeps checking her phone and looking at the door," she texted. Then 20 minutes later, "Chloe's crying. Your dad looks angry. They're telling everyone you've changed and become cold." I read the messages, turned off my phone, and went back to sanding. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Them sitting in a living room staging an emotional ambush while I stood in my garage doing exactly what I wanted to do with my Saturday. Sunday morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. The camera footage showed my mom's car pulling up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, taping something to the door with shaking hands, then driving away quickly. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off and drove it straight to Attorney Roberts' office without even opening it. He opened it wearing gloves like always. Inside was a long letter from my mom talking about legacy and forgiveness and family history and how Grandpa Arthur would be ashamed of the man I'd become, how I was destroying the family over pride. "This is manipulative as hell," he said, adding it to our growing file. "This whole guilt-tripping about your grandfather. It's textbook emotional manipulation. We're filing for restraining orders this week." Monday afternoon, David called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, kept adjusting his glasses, not quite making eye contact. My mom had called the museum that morning and told the receptionist I was having a serious mental health crisis, and David needed to check on me immediately. I could see he was trying to figure out if it was true, trying to balance concern for an employee with the obvious weirdness of the situation. I sat down. I explained the whole situation calmly and clearly, the divorce, the boundaries I'd set, the lawyer I'd hired, the documentation I had of every violation. David listened, nodded, and when I finished, he looked relieved. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Do what you need to do. We'll support you." I called Attorney Roberts from my car in the parking lot, told him about the call to my workplace, and heard him typing furiously on his keyboard. "That's harassment and potentially defamation. We're filing today," he said. And that same clarity from the first night settled over me again. The temporary restraining orders were granted Wednesday. Judge Miller looked at our documentation, the timeline we built, and signed them without much hesitation or questioning. Thursday morning, a process server delivered them to my parents' house. I wasn't there, but Brooke heard from family members what happened and texted me the details. Your dad answered the door, read the papers, then crumpled them up and threw them on the ground. He's furious. Your mom's in tears. They're calling you unstable and telling everyone you need help. But the important thing was they'd been served. They'd been officially notified. And any contact from this point forward would be a legal violation with real consequences. Friday afternoon, I was at the museum finishing restoration work on a Ming Dynasty bowl when security called my extension. Your parents are in the lobby. They're saying it's a family emergency and they need to see you right now, the guard said, and I could hear my mom's voice in the background getting louder and more frantic. I told him to call the police immediately. I told him they had active restraining orders and this was a direct violation. And I stayed at my desk while it all happened. David came by 10 minutes later and said they'd been escorted out by police, that they claimed Grandma Rose had fallen and was in the hospital dying. My grandmother died 6 years ago, I said, and David just shook his head in disbelief. The police gave them a warning for trespassing and violating the restraining order. They filed an official incident report, and I emailed a copy to Attorney Roberts that night. This helps our case tremendously for permanent orders, he replied. The grocery store incident happened Sunday morning. I was buying coffee and eggs when I turned down the cereal aisle and saw Chloe standing there with Maya sitting in the shopping cart. She froze when she saw me. Her face went completely pale, and I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording video. You see me, you leave, I said clearly and calmly into the camera. I made sure to capture her face, the timestamp, the location, everything Attorney Roberts would need. She grabbed the cart and rushed toward the registers without saying a word. I saved the video, labeled it Exhibit C, and sent it to Attorney Roberts before I even finished checking out. Tuesday, Attorney Roberts called and said my mom had filed a countermotion claiming I was having a psychological episode and that the restraining orders were based on my mental instability, not their actual behavior. It's a Hail Mary, he said. She has no medical records, no evidence, absolutely nothing to support this claim. The judge is going to see right through it. The hearing was scheduled for Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I took the day off work to prepare myself mentally. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Miller was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. And when I walked in, I saw my parents sitting on one side with Chloe positioned between them. It looked staged, carefully coordinated. This united front against me, designed to make me look like the unreasonable one. Attorney Roberts laid out our case methodically and professionally. He showed the timeline starting from their first appearance on my porch, the screenshots, the voicemails, the camera footage, the police report from the museum, the grocery store video, the letter taped to my door. He showed the calls to my workplace claiming I was mentally unstable, the manufactured emergency about my grandmother who died 6 years ago, the intervention I never agreed to attend. Judge Miller listened carefully, took detailed notes, and when Attorney Roberts finished, she looked directly at my mom. Do you have medical records supporting your claim that your son is psychologically unstable? My mom stammered. Said she was just concerned as a mother. Said a mother knows when something's wrong with her child. And Judge Miller cut her off mid-sentence. Not liking one's family isn't a mental illness, she said firmly, and I watched my dad's face turn bright red. Judge Miller granted permanent restraining orders for 3 years. No direct contact, no indirect contact, no third-party contact allowed. Violations would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. She looked at my parents when she said it, made absolutely sure they understood the seriousness and consequences. And then she dismissed the court. I walked out without looking back. Attorney Roberts shook my hand in the hallway and said I'd done everything right. And I drove home in complete silence. 3 months later, my life looks exactly like I wanted it to look. I go to work. I restore ceramics that have been broken for centuries. I refinish furniture on weekends. I take Buster camping with my friend, Jake, when the weather's nice. I updated my emergency contacts at work to remove my parents completely. I revised my will to leave everything to charity, specifically arts education programs and a domestic violence shelter that helps people escape toxic family situations. My parents are strangers now. Chloe is someone I used to know in another life. And the peace I have isn't the fake kind I used to pretend existed at family dinners. It's real and solid and mine. Sometimes the healthiest and most courageous thing you can do is recognize when a relationship, even with the people who raised you, has no structural integrity left to save, and walk away to protect your peace. What do you think about this? What would you have done?